The silence in the medieval jail had the weight of stone pressing down on your chest, a cold promise curling through the damp air before the first pale light of dawn even stretched its fingers through the tiny barred window. You woke to the gray seep of morning, the narrow cell enclosing you like a stone coffin, the walls cold and rough against your skin. Somewhere beneath the coarse straw mattress, rats scurried, tiny feet tapping a rhythm that echoed with the endless monotony of your days chained within these cold walls. The muffled clang of iron shackles sliding open was your reluctant alarm clock. Your body ached as you eased yourself upright, joints stiff like the gnarled wood of the village gates that never seemed to swing smoothly. The wool roughened against your bruised skin, your coat threadbare and smelling faintly of mildew, mixed with the stale tang of unwashed flesh. The muffled groan of distant footsteps hummed low in the stone corridors, a drone as familiar and dull as the scrape of a blade being sharpened along a grindstone. That cold, steady noise marked the beginning of your survival ritual. Outside, through the narrow slits, you caught sight of the village buried under a mist that blurred shapes into ghosts, the silhouette of a thatched roof here, the spindly outline of a withered tree there. The sky was a dim, pale wash of winter blue, the kind of cold that seeps deep into bone and thought alike. You wondered how it compared to the modern freeze of an office AC gridlocked on. Arctic tempest? Only back then, the chill was natural and far less forgiving. Hunger gnawed gently, but incessantly at your belly, a reminder sharper than the scratch of coarse cloth. Spoiled bread, sometimes stretched with sawdust or worse, was often the closest you came to a meal here. You remembered the warmth of the communal fire from the night before, the small hopes sparked by shared breaths and fleeting smiles. For a moment, the cold seemed less cruel, the relentless weight more bearable. But the moment flickered and died like the last ember on the hearth. As you shifted your weight heavily from foot to foot, the barking dogs outside abruptly fell silent. The chill in the air deepened, palpable and sudden. From the shadowed doorway back to the weary, eyes across the hall spoke volumes without a word. Something was coming, something that would twist this dull routine into an unknown peril. Before the guard's steps quickened, rattling the chains once more, you held your breath, caught in the fragile pause between dread and the desperate hope that today might end differently. Hey, before Morpheus catches you completely, take a quick glance to see if you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappeared, and I don't want you to miss the next bedtime tales. While you're at it, leave a like, soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where do you listen from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little calm corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. The footsteps outside quickened, a dull metallic rattle against stone that sent a fresh jab of cold down your spine. The guard's shadow stretched long across the cell floor, the faint light catching on the fraying edges of his worn cloak. His key scraped the lock, a harsh whisper in the heavy quiet, and the cell door groaned open like a reluctant secret. You pushed yourself to your trembling feet, the ache in your limbs knitting a dull, persistent protest. The corridor outside was a tunnel of shifting gray, damp and dense with the murmurs of early morning. Distant voices floated through cracks in the stone, muffled but ever present, as if the walls themselves were whispering tales of captivity. The chill clung to your bones, seeping through the rough wool that barely guarded you from the creeping cold. The air tasted faintly of wet earth and stale bread. The scent lingered like a memory that refused to fade. A pair of guarded eyes met yours in the dimness, just beyond the threshold, flickering with an unreadable mix of caution and weary understanding. You recognized him, the other prisoner, the one whose silence had become an uneasy companion in the slow torture of these days. His gaze spoke volumes. This morning, something was different. The usual dull routine was shattered. You were led down the arched corridor, your shackles dragging a sonorous lament on the stone floor. The faint echo of dripping water joined the symphony of creaks and groans that marked the skeleton of the fortress. The cold stone pressed close on all sides, your world compressed into these tight spaces, framed by shadows that danced with every flicker of torchlight. Venturing out into the dank courtyard was like stepping into another world, gray and sharp-edged, where steam rose from your breath in clouds too fleeting to grasp. The sky was an iron lid above, heavy and unyielding. You rubbed your wrists where the iron bit into your skin. The sting a brutal reminder that freedom here was a myth. Your eyes searched the coarse faces of the guards gathered around a fire pit, more a pit than a refuge, smelling of burnt wood and sweat. Their conversation was low, clipped, words curling in the cold like smoke. They spoke of a stranger, arriving under the cover of night, carrying whispers of strange tidings and a fate that might twist the course of this miserable village. You caught a flicker of movement, a figure cloaked, hood drawn low, stepping through the gate with the silent certainty of someone who does not belong but demands to be noticed. The villagers, feathered and wary, watched this shadow approach like it was the herald of some dark reckoning. Back in your cell, only hours before, the only visitor had been the damp chill and the scattered cries of rats. Now, the quiet was shattered. The guard who unearthed you from your stone tomb carried a key, not just to the door, but to something you could not yet name. You swallowed the knot in your throat as the stranger's words began to weave through the soldier's talk, enigmatic, urgent, something about an uprising, a curse, a reckoning long overdue. The kind of talk swapped in whispers, heavy with dread, but sparking a fragile ember of hope somewhere deep inside. Your stomach twisted with hunger, sharper than ever, gnawing at the edges of your resolve. But amidst the hard, cold, and harsher silence, there was a faint, pulse, a reminder that even in stone and shadow, stories shift and flicker. You clung to this fragile warmth, the ghost of movement shifting the stale air. From behind, the distant sound of the village bell tolled, a mournful ring that reverberated through the valley. It marked the hour with sad clarity, a pulse counting down to some unknown event, sealed in the creak and groan of the old gates. As you were pushed back into the cell, the door thudded shut, and for a moment, the only sound was your own ragged breathing. The cell felt smaller now, the walls closing in tighter, as if sensing the fissure opening between the past and a future upended. You sank back onto the straw, eyes catching the faint light creeping in through the barred window, now tinged with a strange hue. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it a whisper, soft and dangerous, a susurration threading through the trees and stone. The dog's silence had not lasted. You pressed your forehead against the cold wall, heart drumming louder than the fading footsteps. The chains, though heavy, felt almost like a tether to hold you from slipping into a chaotic unknown, or perhaps to tether you to a fate yet to come. And there, in the growing silence between breaths, your ear caught a faint scrape, a sound you thought you knew, but this time it was different, deliberate, measured, and close. Something was waiting, just beyond the threshold. The air curled tighter, thick with a promise both ominous and inevitable. The cold held its breath, and so did you, with the faintest flicker of a question burning in your veins. What would break the silence next? The hush that engulfed the courtyard was heavier than the mist curling over cracked stone. You shuffled forward, the cold iron biting into your wrists with every tentative step, the damp chill sinking into the marrow of your bones. Your breath misted and brittle, vanished quickly into the open air, swallowed by the gray sky that pressed down like a stone slab. The guards clustered near the fire pit, faces hardened by years of cold nights and bitter tasks. Their low murmurs twisted through the biting air, sharp and fragmented. You caught fragments, words loaded with anxiety. Stranger, uprising, change. The rumors had taken shape overnight, and now they hovered, thick and palpable, curling between the wary glances of the sentinels. From the shadowed edge of the gathering, the stranger moved, with calm purpose, his cloak drawn tight against the cold that none could outrun. Spark in those eyes, a reckless hope perhaps, or a warning. The village beyond the fortress walls seemed to hold its breath, the usual clatter and clamor muffled beneath an invisible weight. Even the dogs remained unnervingly silent, their barks swallowed by the creeping cold. The stranger's voice cut through the murmurs, low and steady, threading tales of curses long buried and debts unpaid. His words were riddles wrapped in warning, pulling at the ragged edges of expectation. Each sentence felt like a stone shifted beneath the foundation of your captivity, threatening collapse or revelation. Your heart hammered, a relentless drum under the press of the iron links. Hunger gnawed with a sharpened edge, but beneath that, a deeper hunger stirred, a craving, not for bread or warmth, but for meaning, for movement beyond the stale embrace of these walls. As the stranger spoke, you glimpsed the faces around the fire, surprised, wary, some flickering with a desperate flicker of hope. The soldiers exchanged quick looks, their hands slowly easing from weapons, counsel shifting from command to counsel, unease tangled with intrigue. A distant bell tolled, slow, mournful, marking time that no one wanted to keep. The sound rippled through the chill air, a tether binding present fears to ancient pasts. Sharply, the sound jarring in contrast to the stillness. You found yourself shoved forward, the rough grip of a guard steering you through the gate and down a narrow passage you had never before seen. The walls here were slick with the residue of time, dark streaks and moss-like veins tracing the cold path. The air was heavier here, charged with an energy that prickled at your skin, a faint hum vibrating through the stone. The passage opened into a chamber lit by flickering torchlight, shadows dancing like restless spirits on the walls. Here, the cold was nearly frozen into silence, broken only by the distant drip of water and the soft scrape of unseen feet. Two figures stood across the room, one cloaked like the stranger outside, the other a man with eyes sharp as flint and hands calloused from too many harsh winters. Their conversation was quiet but urgent, words steeped in secrets and desperation. You were pulled forward, the iron cold against your wrists, a sharp reminder of your place. Yet, as you were brought into the torchlit circle, the air seemed charged with something unfamiliar. A glimpse of something beyond mere survival flickered briefly in the flickering light. A breath caught in your chest as the cloaked figure spoke again. This time, words aimed directly at you. The time has come. The chains are more than just iron. They bind a fate, and that fate can be torn. Eyes met yours, the cold cracking just enough to let a shard of flame through. You sensed it then. The fragile, trembling thread of something bigger than fear or despair. A chance to shatter the silence and rewrite the story written in stone. The chamber's walls seemed to lean in closer, the torchlight trembling, as if afraid to witness what might unfurl next. And as the stranger's cloak brushed the air, carrying the scent of damp earth and something wild and unyielding, the silence broke, not with a shout, but with a whisper as sharp as a blade. You swallowed, hard, heart thundering louder than the distant bell, caught between the cold grip of chains and the faintest flicker of a revolution waiting to ignite. And then, from just beyond the heavy oak door, the sound came, an unintentional scrape, slow and measured, echoing through the stone like a summons. The air thickened, breath caught, Waiting. What awaited in the shadow just beyond the threshold was no longer a question. It was a reckoning. The torchlight flickered, sputtering shadows across the cold stone walls as faint footsteps echoed down the narrow hall. Your breath caught, a fragile mist hanging between fear and anticipation. The cloak of the stranger brushed past the heavy oak door once more, his presence a sharp cut through the silence that had wrapped around the fortress like a shroud. The iron shackles on your wrists clinked in protest as you were drawn forward, not dragged, but pulled with a pull that hinted at urgency. The rough grip of the guard guiding you was less harsh than before, almost tentative. There was a weight in the air, thick and expectant, like the moment right before a winter storm breaks loose on the brittle branches. Your skin prickled beneath the threadbare wool, the chill deepening, but beneath it all, a strange ember of something restless stirred inside. Ahead, the chamber stretched wide, its shadows swallowing the edges of flickering torchlight. The stranger awaited, now revealed more clearly, a silhouette carved in the half-light, his hood thrown back just enough to reveal a sharp jaw dusted with unshaven grit, and eyes like coal embers, burning with a dangerous fire. Beside him, the grizzled man with the flint gaze directed a cautious nod in your direction, lips tightening into a line that spoke of long-held secrets too heavy to carry openly. No words passed. As you crossed the threshold, the cold stone beneath your feet seemed to pulse with the promise of upheaval. You could almost feel the heartbeat of the fortress itself, slow, steady, but trembling beneath the weight of the moment. The distant bell had gone silent, as if it too paused, waiting. The stranger's gaze fixed on you, intense and unyielding. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and smooth, like river water brushing stone, pulling you into a current impossible to resist. You have lived in darkness long enough. The chains that bind your wrists are but shadows of the ones that bind this land. His words were raw, sharpened by truth. Tonight, the silence breaks. The grizzled man stepped forward, unrolling a crude parchment marked with faded sigils and hastily scrawled words. The ink was blurred by damp, but the message was clear. A call to arms whispered through decades of oppression and blood. Your throat tightened. Freedom was a word that had tasted bitter for so long it felt foreign on your tongue. You glanced down at the rusted iron biting into your wrists, the marks already raw from days of unyielding cold and neglect. Yet now, something stirred beneath your battered skin, fragile, yet fierce. The stranger moved again, this time peeling a dark glove from his hand, revealing a calloused palm scarred by years of struggle. "You are not here by chance," he said. "We need those who have known the cold, the silence, the waiting. The ones who have kept their spirit hidden, like a candle smothered, but far from extinguished." A soft murmur rose from the shadows. Beyond the torchlit circle, the walls seemed to lean closer, breathing in the tension, as if the fortress itself awaited your answer. You met the stranger's eyes, the fire within them mirrored faintly in your own. Behind the heavy oak door, muffled sounds drew your attention, a shifting, scraping, closer than before. The air grew thicker, loaded with anticipation that seeped into your bones. Your pulse quickened, each beat a slow drum in the vast emptiness of captivity. The grizzled man's voice cut through the encroaching quiet, sharper this time. The village holds its breath. The old wounds are stirring, and the chains that bind us all may shatter or tighten. We stand at the edge of a blade. You swallowed hard, the burning knot in your stomach, equal parts fear and stubborn hope. Hope hidden beneath layers of cold and stone, long buried beneath the weight of silence and despair. Outside, a gust swept through the fortress, howling softly as it swept past the battlements, carrying whispers of an ancient rage woven into the very soil. The scent of damp earth and smoke drifted faintly, a reminder that the world beyond these walls still lived, breathed, waited. The stranger's eyes never left yours. Tonight, you will choose. Stay the prisoner of stone and silence, or rise with those who dare to break the quiet. There is no turning back. Your fingers curled involuntarily, the chains a cruel reminder of what had been stolen. Yet beneath that cold iron, your spirit flickered, a fragile flame catching in the drafty gloom. A shadow moved behind the stranger, barely perceptible but unmistakable. A figure swollen with purpose, silent as the grave, waiting for the signal that would ignite the night. The scraping at the door quickened, deliberate, like a blade drawn from its sheath, announcing that time was no longer yours to keep. Your breath caught once more, ragged and sharp against the cold. The moment stretched, poised between the last dying ember and the fierce blaze promised by the dawn. And then the stranger stepped forward, hand outstretched, voice barely above a whisper, yet cutting through the thick stone air. Are you ready to walk beyond these chains, into a story still waiting to be written? The door swung open in slow motion, a shaft of darkness slicing through the torchlight and spilling something ancient and wild into the chamber. And in that trembling silence born of shadow and steel, you realized the quiet had ended. Something was coming. The stranger's shadow lingered at the threshold, a dark shape contrasting with the flickering torchlight that trembled like a candle barely holding its flame. You felt the weight of his gaze, as if he were reading the cramped lines etched by weeks of cold and silence on your skin. The iron wrapping your wrists was a harsh reminder of the prison you'd known for so long. A relentless grip that had numbed you, but now it throbbed with a strange, unexpected pulse. The chamber's walls closed around you, cold and indifferent, But beneath the surface, something fragile was awakening. The grizzled man beside the stranger, his eyes sharp and filled with the weariness of too many winters, rolled open an ancient parchment. The faded script twisted like roots amid the dim light, but the intention was clear. Words calling for reckoning, stirring the embers of a revolt, long smoldering beneath layers of stone and despair. You swallowed past the dryness in your throat, fingers curling instinctively, as if trying to grasp a freedom that still felt like a distant echo. The room hummed with tension. The silence stretched fine as spider silk. Each breath, words sank deep, filling the cold air with a kind of fire that neither the torch nor daylight could kindle. You blinked against the grime that clung to your lashes, feeling the chill of the cell morph into something combustible. The hunger in your belly bit sharper, but beneath it simmered a hunger far older. One for meaning, for change, for a story rewritten. The grizzled man's eyes flicked toward the heavy oak door. The faint scrape you had heard before, now sharper, deliberate. The sound slid into the chamber, a steel whisper beckoning, slicing the quiet with calculated patience. Your pulse quickened, a drumbeat threading the stillness, like a new pulse awakening a long-dormant heart. Beyond the door, the sharp scent of damp earth and smoke twisted with the cold air, weaving through the fortress like a ghost of old pain and fierce hope. The village lay in muted gray outside, the faint sounds of life held suspended beneath the weight of what was coming. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath before the deep exhale. The stranger's gaze locked with yours, coal embers burning steady beneath a cloak of fatigue and iron resolve. Tonight, you choose to remain a shadow bound by stone and silence, or to step into a story still unwritten. The chains are heavy, but your spirit is the spark. There was no room for hesitation. Your limbs, swollen with cold and cramped by days of stillness, ached fiercely, but somewhere deep beneath the rust and raw skin, a spark flickered stubbornly, tiny, trembling, yet fierce, a pulse. Breaking through the frozen quiet, the room shifted, shadows dancing closer, as if the stone itself leaned in to witness the birth of something fragile and wild. The grizzled man unrolled the parchment further. The script hinted at blood debts, ancient curses, and a reckoning overdue. Words that threaded fear and hope into a single razor-edged promise. The stranger stepped back into the flickering light, hood falling away to reveal lines carved by hardship. His voice softened, carrying the weight of every broken chain and crushed dream that had ever breathed in this walled world. We need those who have survived the cold, the waiting, the nothing that eats at the soul. You, bound by iron, hold a fire even the darkest cage couldn't smother. A tension hummed through the air. As shadows shifted, whispers rising like a wave poised to break. Outside, the distant bell's mournful toll had ceased, replaced by a rising wind that carried the scent of upheaval, smoke, damp stone, and something wild, raw, untamed. Your breath hitched as the sharp scrape at the chamber door intensified. No longer tentative, but a declaration, a summons from the darkness. The cloak of the stranger stirred as he stepped forward, hand extended, not as a captor, but as an invitation. The air tightened, every nerve alert as the oak door creaked open slowly, hollow and heavy, spilling a sliver of darkness that bled into the torchlight. And then, in that thin slice of shadow and flame, the silence shattered, not with a roar, but with the slow, steady thunder of a story ready to break free. You met the eyes beyond the door, deep wells of intent and iron, reflecting yours with a quiet question burning at their edges. The reckoning had come. The heavy oak door closed behind you with a hollow thud, sealing away the flickering torchlight and the quiet urgency that had filled the chamber just moments before. The faint scent of damp earth lingered, mingling with the sharp tang of iron and the stale breath of centuries imprisoned within these walls. Your wrists ached, the cold fires of the rusted chains still burning beneath your skin, but within your chest a different flame stirred, tentative, fragile, yet impossible to ignore. The stranger's voice echoed softly, still hanging in the quiet air. Tonight is no ordinary night. Those words carved a path through the fog of cold and hopelessness that had kept you imprisoned, not just physically, but in spirit. You wanted to believe them, even as the weight of years chained you to this cell. Outside, the fortress walls seemed to hum, as if waking from a long slumber, creaking against the breath of a rising wind. A faint murmur stirred beyond the door, faint as a skirt brushing the cold stone. The distant echoes of footsteps, more numerous now, threaded through the thick air, each step a silent promise and a warning. The village beyond stirred uneasily, beneath a sky swollen with gathering clouds. The cold wind that slid in through the narrow slits carried whispers of unrest, the scent of smoke curling with the breath of the earth. You pulled the rough wool tighter around your shoulders, the fabric rough and scratchy against bruised skin. Outside your window, icy shapes of skeletal trees swayed against the gray winter sky, naked branches twisting like long-gone fingers craving a final warmth. Somewhere deep, the distant howl of a dog broke the silence. Breaks like these punctuated the long, frozen hours with a vivid reminder. You were alive, trapped but not yet broken. Shadows pooled in corners, thick and restless, reflecting the stirrings within. Your fellow prisoner's eyes caught yours through the bars, a flicker of recognition, of shared fate, of something unspoken but deeply understood. He did not speak, but the tension between you was electric, charged with a hope that threatened to spark even in this frozen tomb. The stranger's words returned to your mind. Own this moment. You weren't just a prisoner anymore. no longer just a shadow in stone and silence, but a spark waiting to ignite a blaze. A sudden scraping at the door made every nerve in your body snap taut. This time the sound was harsher, precise, deliberate. The iron hinges groaned under the weight of whatever waited beyond, slicing the silence like a knife through winter frost. The guards outside shifted uneasily, their voices low and clipped, words sharp and urgent. The door swung open, shutters creaking on ancient hinges as a figure stepped across the threshold. Cloaked in black, his hood drawn low again. But now there was no mistaking the fire burning in those cold, dark eyes. Behind him came others, shadows weaving through shadows, footsteps muted but steady. A small band, moving with the resolve of those who have nothing left to lose. The grizzled man with the flint gaze stepped forward, his voice low but fierce. "It's time." His eyes searched yours, weighing the weight of chains and the promise of freedom. The parchment lay forgotten at his feet, replaced by an unspoken oath. Hands trembling, you stretched your wrists toward the stranger. The chains grated in protest, but the stranger's blade was swift, cutting through iron, as if severing the heavy silence itself. The cold metal fell away with a dull clang, a sound so foreign to your ears, it echoed like a thunderclap in the stillness of your mind. Air filled your lungs with urgent sharpness, the chill no longer biting, but awakening. Your fingers, flexed, rubbed raw against rough stone, tasting a freedom long denied, but no less sweet. Outside, the courtyard was no longer just a frozen cage, but a stage set for something vast, trembling with unspoken promise. The small crowd of conspirators closed ranks, the flicker of torchlight catching glints of steel and whispered prayers alike. The stranger's gaze swept over you again, this time lighter, like a flame turned quicksilver. "Tonight, the silence breaks," he said, "and every chain shatters with it." Heart pounding, you followed them out of the cell. The cold was no longer an enemy, but a fierce companion, sharp and alive. The village lay silent beneath a heavy sky, its streets a labyrinth of shadow and frozen breath. The bell had fallen mute, but the air thrummed with anticipation, thick as the fog curling at your feet. At the edge of the courtyard, a figure slid out from the darkness. A woman, her eyes fierce as winter storms, her voice a whisper that carried like thunder. She nodded to the stranger, then to you. "This is the moment we have waited for. The story will not wait." A breath caught in your throat. The walls that had held you, the warded gates and the shackled past, were no longer prisons, but invitations. The distant howl of the wind rose to a gale, shaking loose the last embers of old fear. And then, from deep within the fortress's shadowed depths, came the sound, a heavy, deliberate step, slow, steady, full of purpose, a harbinger that dawn was not what you feared, but what you awaited. The night hung poised like a blade's edge. And beyond the dark, something waited, watching, ready to change everything. The cold followed you back into the courtyard, like a shadow refusing to fade under the morning sky. Your bare feet, since the guards had yet to bother with proper shoes, pressed against the cracked stones, uneven and sharp, biting into the bruises that the chains left as stubborn souvenirs. Breath billowed in cloudy bursts, each exhalation folding into the mist that clung to the fortress like a secret. Around you, the small group of conspirators gathered with an intensity that felt almost alive, their whispered words carried on the brittle air. The woman with the storm in her eyes moved like a quiet gale, her presence demanding attention without a single raised voice. She spared you a glance, brief but full of purpose, and the weight beneath her gaze made your chest tighten. "What comes now," she murmured, voice barely more than a breath, "will change everything we thought, frozen in time." Her words tethered to the earth, sharp as broken glass beneath your feet. You stepped forward, the newfound freedom in your wrists raw and aching, but the absence of iron felt like stepping from a gray nightmare into a world freshly painted with both danger and hope. The stranger's coal-black eyes scanned the horizon, where the village beyond slept beneath a smeared sheet of winter gray. The withered trees, skeletal against the horizon. "They still don't know," he said quietly, "but tonight silence will be shattered." The wind twisted through the courtyard, carrying the scent of damp stone, wood smoke, and the faintest hint of burnt metal, like the last trace of a dying forge trying to stay alive. In the distance, the old watchtower loomed, its shadow slanting long across the frozen earth, a dark finger pointing toward the future. Your skin prickled as footsteps echoed again, this time from the far end of the courtyard. Armor clinked softly against leather and cloth, a rhythm steady, sure. Figures emerged from the mist, a handful of villagers and guards united by purpose but unspoken fears, dancing just beneath their cautious faces. They moved in silence, their breath a misted chorus that rose and fell with each step. As they came closer, you caught glimpses of faces twisted by years of hardship, scarred, but steadfast. Somewhere beneath the fear, there was a flicker ignited, fueled by the stranger's words, the possibility that these stone walls might finally crack. The grizzled man beside you nodded, his flint gaze sharpening as he surveyed the group, then locking eyes with you. "You're part of this now," he said simply. "No encouragement, no promises, just a shared understanding that the days behind the iron gates were numbered." The warmth from the fire pit was a faint glow against the pallor of dawn, but it felt like a hearth rekindling in the ruins of a cold soul. You stepped closer, the heat brushing your face like a whispered benediction, as if for a brief, stolen moment, the fortress was less a tomb and more a cradle for something fierce and new. The stranger's voice cut through the quiet again, low and steady. The bell has fallen silent here, but its toll will rise elsewhere. The time to act is now. Each shadow cast by these stones holds a story waiting to roar. A sharp crack of breaking wood echoed suddenly, a door thrown open somewhere deeper in the fortress, breaking the fragile circle of trust and quiet preparation like an axe through thin ice. The startled stir among the group was immediate. The woman's eyes flashed steel, her silhouette weaving through the gathering, like a thread pulling loose the fabric of night. Stay sharp. They'll come for us before the moon reaches its peak. You felt the weight of those words settle like a stone in your gut. The cold had grown, sharper now, slicing beneath your ribs as the promise of violence hovered just beyond the heels of your resolve. The stranger stepped closer, lowering his voice further. This is more than a prison break. This is the beginning of a reckoning, written in blood and silence. Once the first step is taken, there is no turning back. The courtyard seemed to contract and expand with each breath, the torches sputtering like candles clinging desperately against the dark. You glanced behind you. The heavy oak door stood wide open, a yawning mouth ready to swallow fate whole. Your gaze shifted upward just as a flock of crows burst from the village trees, black wings cutting jagged shapes into the dying gray of morning. The sound, they never flew at dawn like this, not here. Not since the old days when shadows spoke louder than words. The cold no longer felt inert, but insistent. The air hummed with movement beneath the stillness, a subtle pulse vibrating through the frozen bones of the fortress. Somewhere deep within the walls, a faint scrape, unmistakably deliberate, broke through the suspended moment. You swallowed past the lump lodged in your throat as every nerve stretched taut. The crunch of footsteps approached again, heavier this time, almost without haste but unavoidable. And then, just as the first pale sunbeam cracked the horizon, throwing long, gold shafts over jagged stone, two figures emerged from the fog, their faces hidden beneath hoods pulled low. Silence fell heavier than ever. The stranger's grip closed on your arm, firm but steady. "Remember," he whispered, voice like, but promise edged with steel. "The chain may be cut, but the hand that holds the key is the one that writes history." You looked toward the figures. Between them, a single flickering light, the first ember in a storm yet to come. And as the wind whispered through the empty courtyard, carrying secrets born from stone and shadow, you knew the quiet was broken. Something was moving in the dark, and it was coming for you. The wind shifted, carrying a brittle chill that seemed to seep into your bones as you stepped deeper into the courtyard. The stones beneath your raw feet bit sharply, each step a reminder of the freedom just wrested from the cold iron shackles, now lying forgotten on the ground. The fog clung stubbornly to the low walls, weaving like smoke drawn from a dying fire, soft, gray, and elusive. Around the flickering fire pit, faces emerged from shadows, their features carved by years of hardship and flickers of recent hope. The woman who had spoken before moved through the group with a quiet urgency, her eyes sharp as splintered ice. She glanced at you once more, brief but heavy with purpose. You felt her gaze like a tether around your heart, drawing you into something far larger than the walls that had held you prisoner. The stranger with the embers in his eyes stepped forward, the cloak falling back to reveal the weary lines etched into his face by avarice and battle alike. His voice was a low pulse in the silence, thick with conviction. Tonight, the silence dies. The words rolled over the courtyard, a ripple sweeping through the gathered few, igniting the tentative flame of a promise. Your lungs filled sharply with cold air, tinged with the scent of wet stone, burning wood, and something darker, like iron scorched by old wounds. Somewhere beyond the thick mist, the skeletal branches of trees scratched the sky, restless fingers beckoning in rhythm with the restless beating inside your chest. The group moved as one, a slow, deliberate rhythm forging itself beneath the brittle sky. Armor whispered against rough cloth, their breath rising like morning mist, fragile, fleeting, but alive. Among them were faces marked by unspoken stories. Scars mapped memories of battles fought and lost. Eyes harboring shadows heavier than the winter dusk. The grizzled man who had tossed the ancient parchment at your feet nodded once, a gesture sharp and final. The walls do not just confine the flesh, they contain the fear. Tonight, both break. Your fingers instinctively brushed the raw skin where iron had once bitten deep, a flicker of pain simmering still beneath. Yet beneath that ache, a fierce ember glowed, a promise of renewal. The cold that had been your enemy now shifted, sharpening your senses, binding your resolve. Suddenly, a soft crack echoed through the court, like frost fracturing beneath a careful step. The circle tightened instinctively, voices dropping to whispers that tangled with the wind. The woman's eyes flashed steel. They know, they come. A hollow groan echoed from the fortress depths, the heavy oak doors rattling as shadows lengthened against the flickering torchlight. Your breath caught between the past's suffocation and the future's uncertain weight. The stranger's grip was sure on your arm, warm against the chill. Every chain starts with one link broken, he murmured. Tonight, we shatter what's held us frozen. The torch flames sputtered, casting restless shadows that danced like ghosts across the frostbitten stones. Beyond the flicker, the courtyard stretched black and wide, holding its breath as figures emerged slowly from the gathering fog. Cloaked shapes pressed forward, their footsteps quiet but resolute, faces veiled beneath hoods drawn tight against the cold. A sudden gust of wind spiraled, pulling loose dry leaves and whispers alike, weaving a thread of tension through the frozen air. The sky, a bleak canvas of winter gray, seemed to lean closer, the chill pressing against your skin like a cold judgment. As the newcomers closed the distance, you caught glimpses of familiar faces among the strangers. Villagers long silenced, guards torn between duty and desperation, their eyes flickered with the fragile glow of hope, the kind born not from certainty, but from the hunger to unchain the relentless night. The grizzled man's gaze swept over the approaching group, narrowing before he met your eyes. Sharp, she hissed, voice ablade through the murmurs. They'll come with steel before the moon is high. Your skin prickled beneath the coarse wool, the bitter cold suddenly biting deeper, teeth closing around your ribs. The promise of unrest was thick in the air, an invisible current pulling at the edges of all things held still for too long. The stranger leaned in, voice a low thread of steel. This is no mere escape. This is the first step into a story forged from blood and shadow. Once begun, it cannot be undone. The firelight flickered fiercely, as if stirred by the weight of those words. Behind you, the massive oak door stood wide, hollow and yawning, a portal between the prison of yesterday and the unknown that waited in. The shadows. Above, a sudden dark flutter ripped through the silence as a flock of crows erupted from the bare branches of the village trees, their wings slashing fierce, irregular patterns across the pale sky. Crows didn't fly at dawn here, not unless the air was thick with omens. The cold pulse in your veins quickened, every nerve alive, waiting. The scraping sound you'd felt for days now returned, slow, deliberate, unyielding, pressing against the edge of the chamber like steel against stone. You turned sharply toward the open doorway, heart thrashing like a trapped beast. Emerging from the swirl of mist were two figures, their faces darkened beneath pulled hoods, moving with a gravity that seemed to bend the morning air itself. Between them, a single flickering torch cut through the pale. Dawn, casting long shadows that swayed like the fingers of fate closing in. The stranger's hand found your arm once more, firm but gentle. Remember this moment. Every chain we break, every silence we shatter, will be written in fire. And as the torchlight danced over those dark figures, you realized the reckoning was no longer a whisper on the wind. It had come to claim you. The figures paused beneath the wavering torchlight, their faces half hidden beneath thick hoods that no longer held the chill of fear, but the weight of purpose. You felt the rough stone beneath your bare feet, cold yet grounding, a quiet anchor after the relentless storm of your days behind iron bars. The night's breath curled around you, sharp but strangely alive, as if the fortress itself exhaled a long-held secret. The stranger's steady gaze met yours one last time. The ember in his eyes softened now, shifting from fierce flame to steady glow. The first step is the hardest, he said, voice low like the tick of time itself. But every journey begins with a single breaking. You rubbed your wrists where the cold iron had recently kissed the skin raw. There was no magic spell dissolving the weight of years, no song of freedom soaring on the wind. Just the lingering ache, fierce, honest, and the steady pulse of your own blood, promising the possibility of something beyond shackles and shadows. At the edges of the horizon, the familiar silhouettes of skeletal trees stood silent sentinel, their naked branches reaching toward a sky, shifting from cold slate to the first tentative blush of morning. The village, once muffled by mist and silence, stirred quietly beyond the fortress walls. Time here felt elastic, stretched thin between the weariness of past confinement and the fragile stretch toward what might come next. You caught the eye of the woman with the storm in hers, strength tempered by patience. She gave a faint nod, not a promise, but a solemn acknowledgement. Whatever the dawn would bring, this moment was the turning point. The voices, until now whispers laced with dread and hope, began to coalesce into something steadier, a quiet vow that spoke louder than any. Shout. Your breath rose in soft clouds, mingling with the lingering smoke from the fire pit. The scent of wet earth and burnt wood wrapped around the night's chill like a shawl, comforting in its simplicity. The cold no longer bit with malice, but settled with a clarity that sharpened the edges of your senses. The grizzled man with eyes like flint stepped beside you. His presence was no longer just a shadow from the past, but a steadying hand rooted in the moment. The chains we bore were never ours alone, he murmured, voice carrying a gravelly warmth. But tonight, the weight shifts. It lightens. There was no grand fanfare, no clash of steel or roaring battle cry. Instead, something gentler unfolded, the fragile stirring of long-held silence unraveling thread by careful thread. The distant bell had ceased its mournful toll, replaced by something softer, a slow, rhythmic breathing of the village awakening from a long, troubled sleep. Somewhere far beyond, a dog's bark split the quiet, distant but unmistakably alive. The rawness of the moment was tempered by these small, living sounds, a heartbeat returning to a frozen body. You lifted your gaze slowly toward the horizon, where the first slivers of light spread pale gold over the frost-bitten earth. It was not a blazing dawn, no spectacle of flames to herald salvation, but a quiet unfolding, as if the sky itself exhaled relief through the hush. Among the few gathered figures, some faces softened. Years of hardship, etched on stone-hard expressions, began to ease with the promise that struggle, at last, would give way to breath. The woman's gaze caught yours again, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Not the end, she whispered, but a beginning worth facing. Your hands, once clenched tightly against cold iron, now opened slowly, fingers brushing the rough fabric of your coat. There was pain, yes, but beneath it, a fragile poise, an understanding that the silence broken here was not just an ending, but a seed sown in hope's soil. The stranger stepped back into the shadows. His task completed. In his wake, the fortress no longer felt like a tomb, but a silent witness to change. The stone walls, heavy with centuries of sorrow, seemed less oppressive, softened by the flickering light and the slow pulse of life reclaiming space. You exhaled deeply, the breath steady and full, mingling with the morning's fragile warmth. Each step forward was calm and deliberate, no longer shackled by fear, but guided by a quiet resolve. As you moved beyond the fortress gates, the mist began to lift gently, revealing the world anew. A landscape scarred but enduring, waiting to be met with steady hands and steady hearts. The echoes of the night's tension faded into a gentle hum, the cold giving way to a subtle promise of peace, nurtured through hardship and quiet courage. And there, beneath the lifting dawn, the silence you once bore had finally been broken, not by thunderous upheaval, but by a steady, breathing calm that stretched beyond stone and shadow, inviting rest. You felt it deep within your bones. This was the calm after the storm, the end of the waiting, a place to lay down your weary spirit and find peace. The day ahead was still unknown, vast and open, but for the first time in a long time, the weight upon your chest lifted like morning mist scattered by the sun. You closed your eyes, letting the serenity settle. The cold was gone, not erased, but softened as all things are softened with time. And as the newly risen sun bathed the fortress in golden light, you understood that sometimes the truest freedom was found not in the breaking of chains alone, but in the quiet that follows, a silence no longer heavy, but full of meaning. The story was far from over, but for now, this chapter ended in whispered peace.